Hey folks, so I want to talk a little bit about Andor, the Star Wars show on Disney Plus, and I know that it has proven to be a critical and an audience darling. Like fans and professional reviewers alike think it's just fantastic, and I am not one of those people. I have not enjoyed it very much at all. But before I get into what I have not enjoyed about it and my thoughts on all of that, I do want to say there are parts of it that I appreciate, at least in theory, even if I'm not really enjoying the show. And some of that is stuff that other people who do like the show appreciate as well. So it's not like I don't get it at all, why people like the show. There are parts of it that I do get. Like, I do like the fact that it is almost completely free of fan service and Easter eggs and like really obvious contrived linkages to other Star Wars stuff. You know, it's not constantly stopping to set something up for another show or to do some kind of a strained callback to something else. Like it really avoids all of that. And I really appreciate it. I think that's terrific. I also like the fact that, as a lot of people have said, its focus on the more superficially mundane aspects of the Empire is, again, potentially interesting and is a different angle than most Star Wars films and shows have taken before. Like, the Empire is shown to be evil not because they have a Death Star and they blow up planets, or they're being led by an evil, Dark Lord of the Sith or anything like that. It's the smaller acts of fascism and authoritarianism, the forced relocation of the native people on Aldhani, or the implied existence of like mass incarceration and people being sent to prison without trial and without the chance to have representation or to give their case. Like these things that are not as big and bright and action-packed and fantastic, but are just as evil and just as grinding down on people and just as suffocating to freedom as all the other big stuff. So I appreciate that part of it. But what kills the show for me, one of the main thing, I have other problems with it than what I'm going to talk about, but the main thing that kills the show for me is that nothing ever happens in this show. And I have heard people defend that or explain from their point of view. Like, because I've said before, like, it would be great if I could like this show, but nothing ever happens in this show. You watch the episodes, you sit there for an hour and nothing happens. Nothing happens. And people who like the show will say, oh, well, and they use this phrase a lot, it's a slow burn. I like a slow burn, right? And here's the thing. I like a slow burn too. I do. But I think there's a difference between a slow burn and just nothing happening. And I think, in my opinion, when I watch the show, when I watch Andor, I don't see a slow burn. I see a show where nothing happens. And obviously there are many people who disagree with me, but let me try to explain why I think Andor is a nothing happening show rather than a slow burn show. And it lies in, what do people mean when they say slow burn? Or what do I mean specifically when I say slow burn, when I hear someone describe something as a slow burn? What does that entail? For me, that means a story where an expectation has been created in the minds of the audience, where it's a waiting for the other shoe to drop scenario. You know that something's coming. You just don't know when, and you know that the tension and the pressure is building bit by bit by bit, and eventually it's going to blow. You don't know when. You may not know exactly what form it will take, but you know that there is pressure building. Or I guess because we're saying slow burn, there is heat increasing. And eventually, it's going to catch fire, right? That's the slow burn. So for the slow burn to work and for a story to qualify as a slow burn, in my mind, it needs to have not just the anticipation, not just the expectation of, oh, keep paying attention, something's going to happen. There also has to be that building up, that slow but inevitable and steady increase in tension. And I just don't see any of that in Andor. There have been stories in Andor where we know that something is going to happen, right? Like episodes 3, 4, and 5, that was the heist. They were getting ready to do this big heist and steal a bunch of money from an Imperial facility. So you know that that's coming. Like, you know that they're building up to the heist. Like, this is going to happen at some point in the future. But there's not really any tension. You're just watching them get ready for it. And just watching. There's a lot of procedure. There's a lot of incident. But I'm not really getting any tension. You know, I'm not really getting any sense of, ooh, they're putting so much air into the balloon and any second it's going to pop. Have I used enough metaphors for a slow burn? But that's like, I don't get that. I get characters who are working towards a goal or working towards taking an action, and then eventually, finally, we see them taking the action and we see the result of it, right? But that doesn't really qualify as slow burn to me, because it's just, this is going to happen pretty soon. So now let's watch them get ready for it over way too many episodes. That's not a slow burn to me. That's just bad storytelling. That's just nothing happening storytelling. I'll give you an example of what I think is a slow burn, and a slow burn that works. And obviously, if you watch my stuff on a semi-regular basis, you can probably guess that the example I'm going to give you is pulled from professional wrestling. Because actually, whether you regard professional wrestling as a worthwhile thing to watch, whether you regard it as an art form with any value at all, like, that's up to you. But I do think whether you like pro wrestling or not, it is incredibly valuable at explaining different types of storytelling and different tropes of storytelling, because it uses different tropes and it employs different kinds of storytelling, but it usually does it in such a simple way that talking about wrestling angles or wrestling programs or whatever can be a really effective illustration device. So and there have been tons of slow burns in pro wrestling. It's actually a fairly standard technique. And the most common usage of a slow burn type of storytelling comes when when the promoter, the booker, whatever you want to call them, is setting up a wrestler for a turn, which in wrestling means that they're going to turn either heel or babyface. If a wrestler is a babyface, meaning a heroic character, they turn heel. That means they turn into a bad guy. Or a bad guy would have a babyface turn and would turn into a good guy, right? That's a turn. And some of the best heel and babyface turns in the history of wrestling have been built up through slow burns. And the example that I'm going to use is from the WWF in the early 90s. And there was a terrific wrestler named Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man. One of the great in-ring performers of his generation and one of the best heel wrestling gimmicks ever. He's basically just the asshole rich guy, right? He's the $1 Million Man. He throws his money around. He says everybody has a price. He's the scumbag heel rich guy. And his bodyguard was a dude named Virgil. And Virgil was the guy who took all of the $1 Million Man's abuse and ran his errands and, gave him like foot rubs and all these sort of demeaning personal tasks that he would be given. But he was also like his muscle, he would run interference for him. He would cheat to help him win matches. And for the first 3 or 4 years of their association and of their time in the WWF, Virgil seemed like he was on board with all of this. Like, he was okay with being treated in a way that other people would consider mistreatment. And this was his job, and yeah, whatever. He was fine with it. And then in 1990, they started to just put a little bit of a hint that Virgil wasn't so happy anymore. You know, the $1 Million Man would ask him to do something and Virgil would hesitate a little more than he used to. Or $1 Million Man would yell at him or blame him for something, and Virgil would kind of square up a little bit more, you know, and stand a little taller. Like he was not quite sure if he was going to take this for much longer. And they stretched this out for months so that the fans could see that something had changed in Virgil. He was thinking differently. Maybe he was reconsidering this whole thing, right? But they would just sort of remind you of it every now and then. And every so often it would be a little more obvious or a little more intense, or Virgil would buck up a little bit more than he would the last time, or DiBiase would seem to be really pushing it, and Virgil would seem like he was this close to just losing it and turning on this guy, but he didn't. And eventually they got to the point where it was time to do the turn, and I think it was Royal Rumble 1991. There had just been a match where it was Virgil and the $1 Million Man as a tag team against Dusty Rhodes and his son Dustin Rhodes, and after the match, $1 Million Man was blaming Virgil for something, and he wanted to, I think he had thrown something on the ground. Yeah, it was the $1 Million belt. The $1 Million Man had a special championship belt made for himself because he couldn't actually win a championship, so he spent his own money and had his own title belt made, and he would wear that around, and he would declare himself to be the $1 Million champion. And the belt was on the mat, and he ordered Virgil. He blamed Virgil for I think they lost the match, and he said it was all Virgil's fault. And he said, pick up my belt and put it around my waist. Do it. You know, you work for me. You're nothing without me. And he was really berating him and browbeating him and condescending to him. And finally, Virgil had had enough. And I mean, by this point, the fans were into it. The fans wanted to see Virgil turn on him and stop putting up with this abuse. And of course, Virgil finally does the deed, and he picks up the $1 Million belt, and instead of putting it around the $1 Million Man's waist, he waits for him to turn around to face him, and then he just waffles him in the head with it. He knocks out the $1 Million Man with the $1 Million belt and walks out on him. And now Virgil is his own man, and the $1 Million Man can't push him around anymore. And that was the result of months of gradual buildup. And you, as the audience, as the fan, you could see it coming. You knew that eventually Virgil was going to have enough and he was going to turn on him. That's a slow burn. I think part of it is also that when you are watching a slow burn in a story, you as the audience see it coming before the characters do. When it's something like, for instance, in Andor, where they're building up to a heist, or they're building up to a prison break, as I think the show is building up to currently, because I'm recording this. The most recently released episode is episode 9, and Andor is in prison, and they're sort of starting this build to, they're going to do a prison break. When you're watching something and it's a slow burn, to me, the characters don't always see it coming. The audience sees it coming. The audience has seen enough and knows enough that, something's going to happen here. There's tension building. The pressure is building, right? The characters don't necessarily know. And I think that's kind of crucial too. You know, it's not like a character says, you know, next week I'm going to do this. And then we watch them for a week and then they do the thing they said they were going to do. Like, that's not really a slow burn. A slow burn is we see the train coming, right? And we see that it's way, way back there, and the person standing on the tracks doesn't see it yet, and they're facing the other direction. They have no idea that the train's coming, but here it comes, and we know that it's inevitable, and eventually what we saw was going to happen happens. Like, that's a slow burn to me. And I just don't see that in Andor. I don't feel a sense of tension. I don't feel a sense of anticipation. I don't really know what I'm supposed to be. Like, what is the slow burn building to? You know? What are you expecting is going to happen? What are you waiting to see happen? What is the big payoff that the slow burn is building to? I don't see it. I don't get it. I don't feel that mounting sense of tension and anticipation that I think needs to be there for a real good slow burn. And I don't even get what it's supposed to be in theory. Like, I don't even know what the creators of the show think the slow burn is, if that's their intention. So, like I said, I don't want to take a dump on anybody who likes the show. I think it's great. Lots of people really like the show. And if nothing else, hopefully its lack of relying on fan service will catch on. Maybe this will be one of the few times where studio executives learn a good lesson from a success and they say, oh, people really dug Andor. It didn't have any fan service. It wasn't loaded down with Easter eggs. Maybe we don't need to do that all the time. Maybe we can do an original show that's not constantly pandering to the audience and it will be successful. If that is a result, I think that's fantastic. If the last 3 episodes of the season turn out to be great, that would be terrific too, because like I said, I haven't really dug it so far. So if it pulls up the nose at the end and turns out to be, in my estimation, a great finish to the season, that'd be great. But if you have liked it, more power to you. I'm glad you found something that you like. And I'm not trying to say that you're wrong for liking it or that the show itself is bad or the people who made it should be ashamed or embarrassed or anything. It just has not been my cup of tea. And the big reason why it has not been my cup of tea is that it feels like the story is being told at a terrible pace, way, way too slow, way too many episodes where nothing of any consequence happens. And some people who dig the show are saying it's a slow burn. I don't really see it that way. But if you disagree, please feel free to argue with me in the comments. I would love that. That's it. Bye, everybody. Enjoy the next episode of Andor, if that's your thing. And I'll be quiet so you don't miss anything.